Strangers keep approaching my father and congratulating him on scoring me. My father and I just got back from a father-daughter trip to Japan. This is the first time he and I have done a trip like this. And it was amazing being able to hang out and spend time together, and we are a lot closer now. Because of it, it was an amazing vacation other than the multiple strangers who stopped my dad on the street to congratulate him for dating me. I am good at the don't engage and keep walking game, so the second I saw someone trying to get our attention, I just kept moving. My father wasn't so lucky and went in for the high five before he processed what was being said. I felt so violated and gross, and I can only imagine what my poor father was thinking when he realized what he just high-fived. The second time, we both could see what was about to happen, so he rushed me away from the guy and we completely ignored him. My dad is very laid back and isn't going to cause problems, especially in a foreign country. But I could tell he was upset by it. I can deal with unwanted attention fine. But the fact that they involved my dad and he had to deal with it makes my blood boil. Why do people think it's appropriate to do shit like this? I just feel so gross and sad for my dad because he shouldn't have to deal with this. Oh, gross. My dad was congratulated the same way by some coworkers once. They mentioned how lucky he was that his wife was half his age and delivered lunch. Thankfully, he shut that down. Sorry he high-fived before realizing. Those men are gross. My dad took my sister traveling to Italy one year on her summer break. A couple sat nearby and the wife talked about my dad and sister the entire time in French, which my sister speaks, trying to figure out if sis was dad's mistress or wife. For some odd reason, the thought that she could be his daughter didn't occur to this woman. I have no idea why a parent traveling with their child would automatically be assumed to be a girlfriend. I was once telling my former therapist about how my dad wanted to go on a trip to Australia with just me, and she, without articulating why, would not drop the fact that it was inappropriate that he wanted to travel with just me and not my mom. It was absolutely shocking. That's disgusting. I'm sorry you and your dad have received such crude comments. I have a friend who is ethnically Ethiopian but was adopted by white parents, and every time she's walking with her dad, they either get the death stare or grown-ass men give the dad an approving nod and smile. It's so fucking weird. They've been mistaken for a sugar daddy sugar baby couple countless times. She also looks younger than her age and he's evidently pushing 60. So even worse, because women often assume the dad is a creep. Decades ago, when I was 17, my dad around 66, and I had traveled back to Alaska to visit some family. Checking out of a motel one morning, the clerk leered something along the lines of how lucky he was to have such a young girlfriend. I thought for a second that my dad was going to dive over the front counter and beat his ass. Edit to add, I remember dad slamming the room key on the counter and saying, "She's my daughter and she's 17. It was probably the first and last time that I ever saw him be rude. This is gross, but the family member who said me my entire childhood once went off on a guy who was like, "That's a nice piece of ass you got to him about me." Like full on, "That's a child, WTF is wrong with you?" When I was like 12. And I'm standing there like, but wait. I had a similar issue in my early 20s with my dad, who had me when he was 22. It got worse when we were out with my little sister and everyone assumed she was ours because she looked like both of us. She looks a lot like my dad and I bear some resemblance. It was a very gross feeling seeing how people would look at us. He noticed as well and it made him uncomfortable. Went to a concert with my dad. Dude in the row in front of us kept looking back at me from time to time. When I left for the bathroom, the dude was congratulating my dad on getting a young, hot thing. Dad told him that's my daughter, deadpan face. Dude, then shut up. Fucking ew. I remember going out to eat with my dad and my new baby. He'd come down to meet his grandkid and got a few weird looks from strangers. It took me a minute to realize they thought we were a couple. Yuck. I was about 30 and he was mid-50s at the time. Like if the genders were reversed, most would assume a mom and her son. But people are weird about older men with younger women. Thanks, patriarchy. This happened to my dad multiple times with my sister and I. He hated it. Would get so embarrassed and correct the person every time. I laughed it off when I was younger, but as I got older I appreciated my dad calling out that shit. I was out for lunch with my grandpa who's 83, and the waitress stopped all shocked and said, "Wow. You two are together? You're what, 24? I'm 28, so that part was a bit flattering. But I just deadpanned her and said the gentleman was my grandfather." Fucking gross. Why would that be the assumption? Even if your dad was actually your boyfriend like these people thought, they still would be talking like you were his property. Disgusting. This happens with me and my niece. It is terrible. I've always counted myself as very fortunate that I look so much like my dad that no one ever makes that assumption. Bet this never happens to older women with their sons. More likely, their much younger male partner gets mistaken for their son. I am late 30s and a longtime friend is almost 60. A dude complimented his score when we were out once and my friend stood up and got in his face about how I am his little niece and made him apologize. I am not his niece, but seeing the guy stammering and nervous was cool. It's really interesting reading the replies in this thread and realizing how warped my childhood was. My parents divorced when I was 8 and I would spend summers with my dad. I was 11 the first time he told me at dinner that everyone thought I was his hot young girlfriend. He probably said that every time we went out to dinner together until I was in my early 20s. This happened to me on the subway in NYC with my dad. We were visiting Yankee Stadium and I was 18. It was so gross and ruined the memory. God forbid a father and daughter have a healthy relationship. I could not imagine the side eye I would be giving in your situation. I notice now if I'm out with my dad, just the two of us, people are very careful about asking our relationship. I was at the with my dad recently and the doctor would ask, "And you are?" To me. Ew. That's gross. Even if he wasn't your dad and was literally your husband. That's just yuck. Like you're some conquest or prize or something instead of a person. WTF is wrong with people? Not only is that a gross assumption, but they're congratulating him like you're a prize and as if you aren't there right next to him. One time I was at a store and my dad came by to pick me up. This older lady saw him trying to get my attention and told me something like, "Oh, your husband's they're waiting for you." I was like, WTF. That's my dad. I was also in my 20s probably. Weird. Why would anyone just make an assumption like that with strangers? My dad and I get this sometimes too. It's really frustrating. I assume it's partially a race thing since he's visually very native whereas I look quite white and dress alternative. Our physical similarity is mostly limited to hair. And I dye mine. When I was 16 and my dad and I were headed to Cancun. Our flight got delayed till next day. We grabbed a hotel in Houston and while I was nodding off on his shoulder, the hotel worker asked if we were on our honeymoon. My dad was pissed. He raked those people over the coals for their assumptions. It was so skeevy.